Buen Camino Pilgrims, and welcome back to the Sacred Steps podcast. On this show, we're walking virtually alongside pilgrims and authors, connecting a community of pilgrims from across the globe. My name is Kevin Donahue, pilgrim, backpacker, and author of Sacred Steps, a pilgrimage journal. On today's episode, we're walking virtually alongside Camino pilgrim Johnniewalker from Santiago de Compostela, Spain. Many will know Johnny's name from the community forums and Facebook groups he helps moderate. This summer, Johnny took prayer requests from the global pilgrim community and walked them across the entirety of the Camino Frances in an emotional "We Walk for You" Camino in the age of COVID. Stay tuned after our interview for a preview of our next episode. And be sure to click subscribe on YouTube or your podcast app so that our episodes download automatically to your device. And now, on with the show. Let's welcome Johnniewalker to the Sacred Steps podcast.
Hi, Kevin, and greetings this fine afternoon from Santiago de Compostela.
Wonderful to have you on. I am so excited to welcome you to the podcast. Of course, many of our audience know you from your work in the pilgrim community. Would you tell us a little bit about what drew you to the Camino de Santiago?
Well, this is now almost 20 years ago. I was progressing in my career, and I was doing difficult jobs, sorting out charitable and public organizations that had got themselves into difficulty. And there's no shortage of them, let me tell you. But I was getting older, and I had kind of made myself a promise that when I had enough money to satisfy my needs, if not all of my wants, then I would try to change my life and spend more time doing other things than executive management jobs. Anyway, I'd never heard anything of the Camino de Santiago, and I was invited to dinner at the chairman of the board's house. And off I went to this beautiful house, and he said to me, "Come into the drawing room whilst Jenny is preparing dinner." And we went into this lovely room, and there on the wall was a map of what I now know to be the Camino Frances. And I didn't know it was the Camino Frances. And there was a red line going along the top of Spain and a photograph of his wife with a rucksack marching along, because she was doing it in stages. And whenever she went and did another week or two, they moved the photograph. Well, over dinner that night, she told me all about the Camino. The albergues, the blisters, the fellowship, the sense of freedom, the sense of self-discovery, and so forth. Anyway, I'd never heard of the Camino, but the seed was planted. And then over the next 4 years, I did all my research on the internet. I joined the forums. I used to sit at my desk calculating my pension fund, daydreaming for the day when I could escape. And I started walking. That led to me taking the decision to start off on the Via de la Plata as my first Camino from Seville. I'd been going to Seville for summers, playing the organ in a church in the centre of Seville. I've got friends in Seville. And I thought Seville was the place to which I would retire and sip chilled sherry under an orange tree. Now, life has not worked out like that. My plan didn't work. And on the 2nd of January 2007, I set out from my little house in Seville. I looked back and said, I'm going to return here to retire and live. But of course, 36 days later, I arrived in Santiago and everything had changed. And here we are.
And here we are, more than a decade later. Wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate it very much. This year, Johnny and Stephen put together a project in recognition of the global COVID pandemic. And Johnny, you both realized many pilgrims had not only put off their Camino pilgrimages this year, but also, sadly, many of our pilgrim community were directly impacted by COVID, either themselves or their family. And the two of you put together a Camino called the We Walk For You Camino, to walk the Camino Frances. And you enlisted prayer requests from the pilgrim community, and the community responded.
Well, almost 400 people wrote to us and sent us their prayers, their hopes, their desires, their wishes. It was a huge privilege, actually. And it's something that I would encourage other pilgrims to do when they're preparing for their pilgrimage. Now, whether they believe in God or not, whether they belong to a church, all irrelevant. What I invite my fellow pilgrims to do is to say to their family and friends, people in the golf club, people in their church, people in their street, if you have anything that you want me to reflect on and to pray about while I walk on my Camino to Santiago, and to lay before the tomb of St. James in Santiago de Compostela, please write them down and give them to me. And I would encourage everybody to do that, because it was a very, very humbling experience for people who wrote often about very personal matters that entrusted us with thinking about them as we went on our pilgrim way.
That has to have been
the next time you're preparing for a Camino, Kevin, I expect you to knock your next door neighbour's door and say, "What do you want me to pray for?"
Indeed, I will, and I will take that on my next journey. So I appreciate that counsel. It must have been such an honor and privilege to walk these prayers across the Camino Frances. There are so many points across the Camino that those who are of the faith recognize as having such significance. I'm wondering, for you, carrying prayers of friends and pilgrims, if there were some moments that stood out to you along the Camino that you might share with the pilgrim community today.
Well, these prayers were about every aspect of the human condition. And so we read them, and we prayed, and we reflected every morning as we set out, and we stopped at an appropriate point in the day. Many of the prayers were born of grief for pilgrims who have lost loved ones recently, and also some time ago, who wanted their dead remembered on this pilgrimage. And as you know, on the Camino Frances, there are little memorials that people have set up to pilgrims who have died, but also to their loved ones. And so high in the mountains in Montes de Oca, we decided that we would set up our own memorial. And we set up a little memorial. We had the shell, we had the data stick with 400 prayers on it, and we dedicated that moment and that place to all of the dead that we'd been asked to pray for, that pilgrims had written to us about. And it was actually a very emotional moment. But it was a great honor to do it, Kevin.
I've seen the photos, and I'll link it below in the show notes so that you can see those. There's a beautiful photo from Cruz de Ferro of the stone that you both placed, marking the We Walk For You Camino. You also mentioned in the blog post that many of the prayers were for our global community in general, not specifically for a person or a pilgrim, but for our greater world. What was that like to read some of those prayers for pilgrims?
Well, this is very interesting. And I think it says something about the pilgrim spirituality, which is perhaps in every pilgrim, whether they admit it or not. No matter what the prayer was, a prayer for young people, a prayer for my child, a prayer for my daughter who can't get a job, a prayer for my marriage, which is in difficulty, please pray for someone who's ill. No matter the prayer, I would say 95% of people also finish their prayer request by saying, and it's time that we all prayed for the world, that it may become a better place, that it may become a healthier place, that the environment may be preserved for future generations. And I found that quite remarkable, that in all of 400 prayers, the 90%, more than 90%, finished with a prayer for other people.
That's it. And as you said, it speaks to the Camino Pilgrim spirit, the community of pilgrims worldwide that have become connected to one another through their common spirit, their common experiences, and their common passion for the community in general. And I'd like to speak to you about that and just get your perspective. You have been involved in philanthropy. You've been involved in charitable support. You've been involved in the Camino for more than a decade. There are many people sitting at home right now that wish they could do more to help the people that they've met along the Camino and the albergues, the charitable organizations that support the missions throughout Spain and France, Portugal. Could you give us some insight, share your local perspective? I'm at home. What can I be doing either financially or spiritually to support those who are not seeing pilgrims along the Camino this year?
Well, you could do what I do, which is raise money. Ask your friends, ask your wealthy friends to donate some money or make a donation yourself. It's not difficult. In each of the English language countries, there are pilgrim associations, American Pilgrims on the Camino, the Confraternity of St. James in the United Kingdom, the Canadian Company of Pilgrims, the Australian Friends of the Camino. Approach your local pilgrim association, make a donation to them or ask them how you can help. On the Camino Forum, Ivor's Camino Forum, and also on Facebook, there are lists of albergues and people who are asking for money to keep their business, their Camino business going. You need to take a choice about that. My priority is supporting the charitable albergues and the charitable initiatives on the Camino, because I think they find it most difficult to sustain themselves in this very, very difficult time. So I think there's lots that people can do. Get sponsors for your next Camino, Kevin. What's your plan for your next Camino?
Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me first say, please check the show notes for this. I'm going to link all of the charitable organizations that John mentioned below in the show notes, so that if you're looking, you have it in your heart, the opportunity to support some of these organizations, you can just click one link, take you directly to their donation pages. So please check the show notes below. As far as my next steps, John, I was one of those pilgrims whose plans were dashed by the COVID pandemic, and I did the Camino Português in 2019. My next steps are actually headed back to the British Isles. I had the opportunity to learn more about one of the historic pilgrimages across England, and I'll walk England's Pilgrims Way from London
Wonderful.
to Canterbury, and then
Excellent.
again, COVID willing, my plan is to walk from Canterbury to Rome and try to complete that epic pilgrimage across Europe. There are a lot of things that have to shake out over the next few months, but I think God willing and COVID willing, hopefully by next spring or summer, some of those plans can start to take shape and pilgrims can start to return to some of their pilgrimages as our COVID plans become more clear across the way. I guess I should ask you as well, because I'm sorry.
But just on the whole issue of the COVID plans, some people found my Camino We Walk for You, walking the Camino Francés, to be controversial, and they said you shouldn't be walking the Camino at the time of the pandemic. I just want to say a brief word about this. I live here in Santiago in Spain, where there has been great difficulty controlling the virus spread through communities. In fact, only just the other day, restaurants and bars in Santiago were able to open again because we came through a period of serious restrictions. Now, the rules are very simple. The virus is passed from contact from person to person. Since March of this year, I have had no physical contact with another human. I haven't hugged anybody, I haven't kissed anybody, I haven't shook their hands, and these were the rules which applied as we walked the Camino Frances. No contact with local people, wearing masks at all time, cleaning our hands, keeping everything spotlessly clean, and that's the way the infection is kept under control. So ours was a highly controlled Camino, and well, it was a great blessing to be able to do it. And Kevin, how's your book coming on before we change the subject?
Well, the book is a work in progress, like my life, John, to be honest with you. I have literally many miles to go before I finish. So much of the book is about my faith journey and my pilgrimage journey, and my walks have been solo walks and a bit introspective, learning to accept my relationship again with God and where my life fits on a day-to-day basis within that relationship. And so I'm working on the book. I hope to have it by Easter 2022, but I feel like I still have a few more miles to go before I finish. But thank you for asking. I appreciate it.
I'm sorry to sound like your old man, Kevin, but please be careful. Writing about the Camino is a dangerous thing. Now, in 2008, I said to the Confraternity of St. James, I want to walk the Camino Inglés, and they gave me some walking notes. And they said, maybe you could update these walking notes. And so I wrote my first guidebook to the Camino Inglés. I'd only ever written financial reports until then. And we're now 16 books later, Kevin. So be very careful. This is addictive.
I appreciate the word of caution. Now I have to tell you, if you're interested in seeing Johnny's guidebooks, we'll link them in the show notes below. But those guidebooks also go to support the charitable organizations for the Camino de Santiago. I don't believe I have 16 books in me. I'm struggling to get the first one out, John. So once I get it, we'll put it in the rearview mirror and see what happens. What about you?
When I come back and interview you in 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, Kevin, we'll see how many books you've written then.
I look forward to it. We'll have a glass of sherry under a tree together, and we'll see what we've both accomplished over the last several years. Speaking of Caminos and pilgrimages, John, what's on your calendar? Will you be walking in 2021? And if so, what routes might you consider?
I'm definitely going to be walking in 2021. My plan, my habit is to play, as you know, I'm an organist. I play the organ in the church, the Jesuit Basilica here in Santiago, and I will play on Ash Wednesday, which is the start of Lent. And every year I have a Lenten pilgrimage. And this year it's going to be yet again the Camino Portuguese coastal route, which I absolutely love. I'm walking some of these routes so often people say hello to me as I pass by. But we'll see what stage the vaccination program is at by that point in both Spain and Portugal. We will continue to be extremely careful and maintain the rules of no contact with other people, clean your hands at all times, and wear a mask when you're around other people. And that's what I'll be doing. So Ash Wednesday is the date.
Johnny, thank you so much for joining us on the Sacred Steps podcast. It has been a true pleasure to speak with you, a gentleman of the Camino. I look forward to seeing you in 2021, perhaps on the Camino Portuguese, perhaps in Santiago de Compostela. Thank you again for joining us on the Sacred Steps podcast.
Kevin, it was my pleasure. Good luck.
On our next episode, we're walking virtually alongside Pilgrim Kevin Considine, who recently completed the Via Francigena and the Way of St. Francis to Assisi. If you're interested in these European and Italian pilgrimage routes, please click subscribe so that our next episode downloads automatically to your phone or device. Thank you for joining us for the Sacred Steps podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Donahue. Until next time, be well, stay safe, and buen camino.